Your line is now muted.
Thank you, everyone, for joining today's WPPS training session for the program area. We're going to start this off with just some background information about WPPS, what it is, what you have access to, all of that good stuff. So for that, I'm just going to present one slide here, which you're seeing on the screen now. So what is WPPS? We mentioned this, you saw this in the invite itself, but just to kind of recap there, and I promise we won't spend too much time on it. WPPS stands for Workforce Planning and Personnel System. It is really a collection of 3 systems, and that's what you kind of see reflected on the pyramid there. At the bottom level is the employee roster. Above that is position management, and at the top of that is what you see on the screen as HR actions. Those kind of represent the combined areas that made up the core of DataCat. So the roster, obviously in DataCat, position management, which in DataCat was referred to as staffing, and then HR actions, the 52 tracker, the scorecard, those pieces. So kind of combine all those together, that's what makes up WPPS, but it's just important to know that it's really a collection of individual systems that make up that core functionality. We can give people access to all or individual pieces of this. We can give them access to all of FSIS or just individual program areas or districts within each one of these systems. So it all works together like that. But combined all together, it's WPPS, and that makes up the core of the functionality that was in DataCat. Let's talk about what access you have. And as of right now, actually between yesterday and today, we configured access for everyone that's a part of this training session. So we took whatever permissions you had in DataCat as of yesterday, and we just replicated them within WPPS. So if you had access to the roster in DataCat, we gave you access to the roster in WPPS. If you had access to the roster for all of SSIS, that's what we did, or just your particular program area, that's what we did. If you had access to the staffing module, we gave you access to position management. A smaller portion of people had access to that. And then 52 tracker, set that up. If you could create, if you could approve, et cetera, et cetera. We just replicated exactly what was in place for our starting points, but obviously we can make adjustments to it as we roll this out and, want to include new people or change how the routing works. We can obviously do that. But starting off right now, you have access to whatever you had in DataCat, and we'll show you how you can kind of confirm that we got everything correct a little bit later here. All right, so I'm going to switch the sharing over to my other monitor here. All right, so first let's just talk how you access WPPS, how you get to it. If you're not aware, WPPS is a part of the HR portal, or HRTSS, as it is also referred to. So that's a system you might be familiar with if you've been to the portal, if you've been in PAM, if you've worked with the Workbench, et cetera. This is just another system that's available in that entire suite, and it's kind of hooked in with all that stuff. If you've never been to it before, fear not. Here's how you can always get to it. From your desktop, you will have a folder somewhere. Everyone's desktop, I know, looks a little bit different based on your own preferences, but there will always be a shortcut to FSIS applications. If you open that up, you will always find a link in there to the OHR portal. You might also want to set a favorite to particular systems. Maybe the 52 tracker, if that's kind of the primary tool that you use, you can just set a favorite to that dashboard and just use that from your browser. But if you get a new machine or you lost your favorites, anything like that, you can always come here and get directly into it. When you open that up, you're going to log in with your EOS. And I've already done that here in our testing environment where we are going to kind of do our training from today. All right. So the one other kind of general information setup thing that's specific to the roster is I wanted to cover very briefly where this information comes from. And I'm just going to bring this over here. The OHR portal, or HRGSS, we have a feed set up with NFC. We actually use a tool called Insight to pull down that information. What that means for WIPs and the different systems that you're going to access within it is that NFC is the source of official HR information. That doesn't change. We're pulling that down from Insight, but NFC is where all that information is coming from. We pull down, and you kind of see that reflected here. I'll zoom in a little bit just so it's a little more clear. We pull down, whoa. There we go. We pull down on a nightly basis different types of information, but the core buckets are a list of all the active employees, all the positions that those employees are attached to, and all the different attributes of those positions and employees. We pull down all the actions that have been processed on a nightly basis, and then what we call data lookups. Different codes, their definitions, org codes is something to, an easy way to kind of think about that. Any new org codes that were created or adjusted that have different meanings, we pull those down on a nightly basis. Now, that information doesn't always change every night, but what it does mean as a kind of a key difference and what we feel is an improvement from the DataCat world is that we do get information faster than DataCat does. So if you're working with DataCat, you're probably familiar with the 2-week delay, and it's really a week and a half, really a 21-day delay. And that means from the day that somebody came in the building, it would be 21 days before they would show up in DataCat, where you could search them in the roster or select them for an action. With the new model of how we pull down data from NFC and get it nightly and just how we've structured all that, we're getting them in about 10 days after they start. So I've made a significant improvement, and so that's 10 days as opposed to the 21, where you can start working with them within 52 Tracker, look them up in the roster, or use them in any of our other systems like PAM. So based on this process, we are able to get them a little quicker, and wanted to point that out. Okay, enough of the slides. Everything from this point is going to be the real deal. All right, just going to reference back to our training objectives so I can keep track of what we've covered. So we talked about the single source of information. Let's pick it up on how to access. So if you've logged into the portal from the shortcut on the FSIS applications folder, or you have a favorite set up, here's how you get to the roster or any of the other systems that you have access to. The easiest way to do that is just click the systems menu in the top to go to the systems page. From there, you're going to see unlocked blocks for all the systems that you have access to, and locked blocks for any that you don't. If you're familiar with the flyout menu that you see here, you can also get directly to the system. If you hover over WIPs, you'll see the different components listed there that you have access to. So if you click into the employee roster, that will also get you to the same place. But I just find it's a little easier. Just go straight to systems and then launch from here. If you have access to the roster, you are going to see a block for employee roster, and click that to get into it. Now, the roster itself, pretty straightforward, right? It's just a list of employees. The information that you see comes from NFC, so you can't manipulate it or change it in any way because, we only want the official data to be reflected here. You can search it, you can view it, all of that stuff. So let's just kind of go over the different ways that you have available to search for somebody. Probably the most common that you're going to do is search for them by name. and you would use the first name, last name fields there, enter those in, click search, and that will return you anybody that matches. This does do partial searches. So let's say that we had somebody named Demond, and that's just all that I put in. I didn't put the last name employee. He would pick up along with anybody that had a start, whose name also began with demo in this case. So it does do partial searches. It doesn't do wildcard searches in its current state. But basically, the rule of thumb, the less you put in, the more results you're likely to get back. So if you're unsure at all about anybody, the name, spelling of their name, if you just put in at a minimum 2 characters, you would get the most number of results and then be able to isolate the person you're looking for from there. There are a couple other ways that you can search, though. Let me just undo what I have here. From the dashboard itself, you could also filter by employee type. So this is one of the features of the roster that's a part of WPPS, is that we have the ability to store employee types that don't come through our NFC feed. So we can create contractors, student interns. Some students come through the feed, but some don't. So student interns, commissioned corps officers, we can create all of them within WPPS so that we can work with them in other systems. Maybe we want to give them access to something. Maybe we want them to be, the subject of something, like in workplace violence, for example. So you are able to filter straight off of that from here if you know that you're looking for a particular type. If you just leave it as employee type, it's going to search all of those groups at once. The other filters that are available are under this advanced search. So if you click that, you are able to drill down to a particular org code or collection of org codes that you just want to see the entire roster for. We utilize this feature in a lot of different places, so this is actually a good thing to kind of understand. Now, you're only going to see the options that you have access to. So our demo employee that we're using here has access to see the roster for all of FSIS. So because of that, they can drill down to specific level 2s and select specific ones and apply them. So I just selected OHR. You can see of the almost 9,000 people that were there when I started with. Now we've isolated to the 147. At least that's the count of employees that are in our test environment here, and we don't have totally updated data there. So you can use that. If you were locked down to just your particular program area, when you go into this advanced search, you'll only see, starting with level 3 and can drill down from there to a particular branch or particular division. So what you see might be a little bit different based on how we set you up, but the core functionality is the same. I didn't point this out when we were searching by employee, but if you have a filter applied, you can quickly unapply it. You see this filtering by section here at the top of the dashboard. Anything that you're using to search by is going to be listed there, and they do work in conjunction with each other. So if I OHR and our demo employee here, you'll see we can isolate off of that. If I want to unapply any of them, I can just close these out. So now you can see I took off the demo employee, so now I'm back to seeing everything that was in OHR. If I wanted to turn those off, I could turn off OHR. Now I'm looking at all of OM, and then if I just wanted to reset it entirely, I can take that off and see exactly what I had as a starting point there. All right, those are the different ways that you can search an employee, search the roster. But again, like I said, most common, probably just going to be straight up by their name. How you view the details of that particular employee, ironically enough, are by the View Details link. So if you click that, you will go to the detail page for that particular employee. So the information that we show you here is it's broken up into different sections. Some basics at the top, just some pedigree information that we want to show to you right away that you might be utilizing most commonly, position information, information that's specific to their job, service information, pay and benefits, sensitive information, which I've sanitized for our training here today. Then we have a personnel action history. When you come into the profile page for the first time, we automatically collapse this just because it can be quite lengthy if there's a lot of actions for this particular employee. So we don't want to stretch the page too much by default for you. So if that is something you want to look at, just click the plus sign to expand it. If you're familiar with the data cat looking at employee, there was that section on the right that had a running list of the actions that have occurred in the past 5 years for that particular employee that you could see. They had a change in duty station on this date, promotion on this date. That's the same thing that we're replicating here. I did see a question come in just clarifying what we meant by adding other employee categories by commission cores, et cetera. No, our system doesn't communicate with the person model. This is just to add those entities into HRGSS itself. We're not trying to be the repository for all of those entities. For reporting purposes, that should be the person model as it is today. The only reason you would want to add them into our system is so that you could do something with them in one of our other modules. Most commonly is give them access to something. The easiest example, we have a certain group of commission cores that serve as rating officials in PAM. So we had to manually kind of do all that behind the scenes when we were launching PAM, but now that we have the roster activated, if that was something that needed to be done in your particular program area, you could just create that non-federal employee entity from here, create the commission core, there's a wizard you'd go through, and then they would exist for us to give them access to different systems. But no, we're not communicating with the person model. We're not the repository for all of those entities. That's just if you have a reason to create them within HRGSS so that you can use them in one of the other modules. All right, so back to the details here. Let me go back to our demo employee. Back to the details. So what you're seeing on the screen is basically our full access to the roster where we just expose everything that we have to you. We do have one other view that's more of a basic view, and in that case we hide the sensitive information block from you. Like I said, when we replicated what access you had in DataCat, we looked at the different permissions that were checked for you and gave you one or the other accordingly. So, what you'll see is kind of reflected of what you had access to there. If we need to adjust that, we'll cover how you reach out to us and we can, make the adjustment and give you access to the full version if that's something you need for your job. All right, we covered for the roster, we covered how to view an employee's details. We just covered the full access for the versus the basic access. All right, so this is how you're going to interact with the roster when you're searching for a specific person and just need to look up their details very, quickly. But the other kind of main use case for the roster is really running a roster report, right? This is great and lets you see individual people, but you might want to see like a list of people all at once to then go work with it, potentially outside of the system. So for that, we are going to go to reporting. Whenever you're coming into a new system, I had already gotten into the roster earlier today, which is why you didn't see that when I went in there. But I haven't been in reporting today. But you will see the standard system acknowledgement. You're only going to see that once per day per system, so you're not going to see that every time. We store that as a cookie, so if you happen to delete your cookies, you might see it again, but just acknowledge it and you'll get straight through. So if you have access to the roster, which we've just created today for this group of people, you would have access to the employee roster report. So as we created access, you'll see this now if you've familiar with our reporting module and getting into it, click into that report to run it. All right. If you've not worked with our reports before, it's kind of a three-step process, really. First is define your universe. Second is select your results, and then third is export them out. So let's just go through that really quickly. If you want to define your universe, you have the same search parameters that you had before. You can search for individual person or persons by name and kind of manually add in the report. You can also use the advanced filters. We have that security context filter here. You can see the access for this employee is configured a little differently, and I did that on purpose so that you could kind of see that we limited the roster view here so that we could drill down. You can just see it's limited to a specific level 5, so there are no other results other than where this employee actually sits. So there aren't actually any codes beyond that, so that's why you see blanks there. In the advanced filters, we also have some additional ways to filter this report up front. If you only wanted to see a particular pay plan code, you could use that. A particular series, a particular grade, a particular bargaining unit code. Those were the ones that we thought you might need most frequently here. So those are how you kind of define your universe. What people you just not want to include right off the bat, either by name or filtering to particular program area or those other options you saw under advanced search. After you apply those, you'll see a list of people in the table below that match that criteria that you're looking for, whatever that is. Then you need to select which one of those you want to include on the report. Now, probably what you're going to do most frequently is select all the items. And I did that by clicking the plus sign at the top of this column and selecting all. You can see that it worked correctly because it moved all those 7 people to the selected items tab. Those are the exact 7 results that are going to print off on the roster. So really use the filters just to define who you want to see at all, and then select the individual ones or all of them that you want to include on the report. I'm going to just refresh because I only want to include our sanitized demo employee on this particular report. So I'm just going to select them. I don't need to filter anything. There's only 7 people here. There are a couple questions that have come through. I want to address those quickly here. Are we going to be able to complete the Fair Act inventory in WIPs? Yes. That's going to be done in position management. That's probably not something, I have that on the list for today if we have time, but it's not super critical to our rollout for right now. We'll probably come over the top with a specific position management training session where we'll cover that Fair Act stuff once we're closer to that date. Since there's a very smaller subset of people that have access to that, so we'll kind of talk about that later. Does the advanced search option include duty station? On this report, no. It is something we could add. I do believe that that is a result that you'll see, so you could always filter it after the fact, but if that's something we want to add in, we'll take a look at that. Okay, so use your filters to define your universe or just who you want to see or not see. Select the individual records that you want to or all of them. And then last step, hit the CSV to export those out. And then that is going to generate in a CSV file the report itself, which I'm dragging over to my machine. And so, this is really our approach to reports for WIPs and all of HRGSS, at least to start off with, is, you can get into a lot of overhead with reports. I want this data. You could have the same report 10 times just with slightly different filters or slightly different columns. And we didn't really have the time or budget to create an entire reporting engine. So, the reports that we've created, we give you some filters, let you just kind of define who you want to see in the broadest terms that we can. You can select your individual results, like we went through. But then when you export it out, we're just going to give you everything we got because we didn't really want to be in the report game where, well, give me the roster, but with only these 5 columns, and give me the roster with these 10 columns. And we didn't have, the time to create a mechanism for you to be able to, define queries with our system. There's a lot of reporting tools that do that sort of stuff. So this is just straight up, we'll give you everything we got if you have access to it. You'll see here, just since it came up, here is the duty station for this particular employee. So you can see that is a column that will expose out to you, and then you could then filter this off of that. This came up in our original training session. Could I run the report by a particular supervisor? And yes, I mean, you would run the report using the filters that we have. We don't have a specific supervisor option, but again, maybe that's something we look into adding. But it is a column that we export out to you, so you could run it for the particular program area or district that you're looking for, and then we have the supervisor column. From there, you could filter if you wanted to look at a particular person or persons. All right. Close that. Let's go back to our training objectives here. So for the roster itself, we've talked about where the data is coming from, how you get to it, how you look for somebody, the different advanced search options that you have, the different access that we have, how you run the roster report, and kind of what you have available there. That's really it as far as the roster features go. It's pretty straightforward. It's a roster. You look it up. You look at details. There are a couple other bells and whistles that we're not focusing on right now. You saw back in the roster screen itself, if I go back there, there's this create non-federal employee wizard. That's to create those other entities, the contractor, student, commission corps officer there. We're not going to, in the interest of time, we're not going to cover that right now. We will have some guides that we're creating that will walk through that. I mean, it's a wizard. It's a pretty straightforward process. But we'll put some guides together that, walk through that particular piece just so we can keep things moving here. But let's talk about how you reach out to, there was actually one other question that was specific to that I wanted to circle back to. Could we add CCO to the org charts even for those that don't have specific roles within PAM, i.e. non-supervisory? We'd have to take a look at that. I mean, out of the box, no, because the org chart is only going to display, the org chart is also showing the different reports to relationships that exist in NFC. So if that commission corps officer isn't in a particular reports to slot from the data that we're pulling, it's not going to reflect that. But maybe that's something we take a look at, kind of folding in the kind of next phase of this thing. So out of the box, no, but that's because the org chart is only showing you official data, not, kind of allow you to adjust it, outside of what's in there. Okay, let's close the loop on the roster. Let's just go over very quickly how you reach out to us for support. And we're going to make it real easy for you. There's the Ask a Question feature of the portal. So if you're already in there, that's the best way to reach out to us. A lot of you have been doing this already with PAM and other systems. This is the same mechanism you use to reach out to us for those systems. For PAM and other systems that have like a high volume of users, we created, individual systems for you to select. So like PAM, for example, has its own particular option. For all of the WIP systems, just send that to HR systems. Don't fret if you send it to the wrong one. It's probably going to end up at the same place anyway, but we can share things back and forth as needed. So don't worry if you select the wrong one. But HR systems, keep it easy. Anything that's specific to WIPs or HRGSS in general, if you send to that, we'll get it and be able to work with you. Give us your phone number just in case we need to reach back out to you, and then submit the question in here. Now, this field, off the top of my head, I don't have the character limit, but it isn't, unlimited there, and that's by design. We don't want you to write a whole book here just to send us the initial email. Just give us enough to understand the context, and then we'll reach out to you. Really the value is connecting with you either via email or phone or screen share to resolve what's going on. So just give us enough context to know kind of what is needed. Yes, you can still, if you are already familiar with emailing the HR system request box just from Outlook directly, that also works fine. These messages end up going to this exact same place. So if that's kind of the routine that you're used to, please continue to do that. That is also welcome. Okay, for our roster users, before I let you go, let's talk about next steps and what in DataCat is going to be changing over the next couple of days. So what you can do right now, test your access. Like I said, we created everybody over the last 24-ish hours here. So please log into the portal, go to your systems page, make sure you see that roster block and any other systems that you might have access to, 52 tracker, staffing, et cetera. Make sure we got that right. For the roster specifically, go ahead and click into it. Do a search. Look at the results. Make sure we can, make sure we set you up in the right way. There was a lot of people to create, and, maybe we gave you the basic when you needed the full. That's actually come up already, so just double check for us and let us know if we need to adjust anything, and reach out to us via those mechanisms that we already talked about, and we will be happy to assist. So in regards to the DataCat roster, if you only had access to the roster, which there's a very small group of people in this particular training session that fit that criteria, but if you did, if that's all you had access to, then we are going to turn off your DataCat access because we want you to use our roster, and we want you to, we want to make sure that ours meets the need that you need for your job. So we'll be doing that over the rest of this week here. We're not killing your DataCat access entirely. We're still keeping it in our pocket in case there's an emergency and, need to roll back to that for any reason. But we are going to limit your access in there so that we can make sure stuff is going to our system and that we're making any corrections or adjustments that are needed as we bring more and more users. Yes, question came through. You should already have access. As of right now, you should. So as soon as we hang off here, you can go check that out. Hang up here, you can check that out. So back to this. If you only had access to the roster, we will be turning that off. If you had access to that and other things like 52 tracker, we'll talk about what we're changing there in a moment, or kind of once we get to this point for the 52 tracker piece. But if that's all you had access to, we are going to deactivate that so we can force you to come to the HRGSS and make sure that everything there is going to work for you. Okay, that is it for the employee roster portion. So as I promised, if that is all you had access to, you can drop now and we will continue with the 52 tracker. I am going to stop the recording and then restart it so that I can have clean, separate sessions for just the roster and just the 52 tracker. So just bear with me here.